Good morning. It is Wednesday, the 21st of September. We are still in the story, the wonderful book of Esther, chapter 6, the whole of that chapter, all effectively 14 verses of it. And here, this chapter probably marks for us the pivotal turning point of the whole story. What might have started off as a very broad story with lots of different things happening, in chapter 6, it all comes together, and like a laser light, it points into the future and sets the scene for the demise of Haman, for the glorification of the people of God, of the Jews. Various diverse elements that take place earlier in the book now all come to fruition. For example, we read earlier that Mordecai, one day sitting at the gates of either the city or the palace, overhears two guards plotting the assassination of King Xerxes. Now, remember that at this point, Mordecai already knew that as a Jew, Haman had plotted for his downfall and that he would then be, along with all the other Jews, killed. But there is no sense in which Mordecai listens to this assassination plot and says, well, perhaps in a strange way, this is the hand of God at work, and so I shall just simply keep quiet. And perhaps if the king is killed, then his edict that all the Jews must also be killed on a particular day will also fall away. No, there's a wonderful sense in which Mordecai simply does what is right. He reports the plot to the king. And then the story goes quiet. Nothing else happens. We are told that it is now approximately 5 years later. That brings us up to the point from the time when Mordecai had reported the plot to the time where Esther is now holding these banquets for the king. And the other interesting point is that Haman has plotted the demise of the Jews. He's not killed them yet, but his plot seems to be going in the right direction, according to him, but he is now also plotted to bring about the demise of his arch enemy in the story, which is Mordecai. And as we completed yesterday's reading, Haman is encouraged to build the gallows 75 feet high. Whether the gallows were really that high or whether they were placed up on some pedestal, perhaps the city wall, so that all could see. And Haman gets the carpentry begun, and he then heads off to the palace to get permission from the king to kill Mordecai. And so you've got all these diverse little strings, and I've given just a few examples of them all coming together. And then in chapter 6, you discover the king struggles to sleep. Whether he can't fall asleep or he wakes up early, somehow the timing is not that important. It's the fact that the king cannot sleep. And he has in mind then that his officials must bring the books of the annals of the state, the chronicles of what has happened, and they must read to him. And by sheer coincidence, or is this God at work, they open to the page where 5 years earlier they had written about this assassination attempt. And the king listens to this, he's reminded of the event, and he asks them, this man Mordecai, has he ever been rewarded? It seems to me the king knows that he is a Jew. What's interesting is that when Haman had threatened and gotten the king to agree to kill all the Jews, Haman had not specifically identified who this people group were. Again, shows perhaps the weak leadership coming from Xerxes. He's quite happy to let a whole people group in his kingdom be wiped out, and he's not even interested in who they are. And suddenly he realizes that Mordecai, as a Jew, has not been rewarded. And so he says to the officials, I need to speak to a senior official who's available in the palace court. And they come back and they say, Haman has just arrived. Of course, Haman has just arrived because he wants to get authority from the king to have Mordecai hung on the gallows that he has been building right through this night. And so the king asks Haman to come in, and Haman is very pleased with himself. But before he can ask his question, the king has a question himself for Haman. And again, the question is a little bit vague, which leads Haman to think the king must be talking about himself. Haman, the king says, what do I do to honor a man who has served this kingdom so well? And Haman automatically thinks the king is talking about himself. So pride comes before a fall. And so Haman doesn't ask for money. Presumably he's got more than enough money. But he asks for something which in a sense flatters the king, but also is quite easy for the king to do. He says, and yet very significant from a stature point of view. He says, get a robe the king has worn, get a horse the king has ridden, and put this man who is to be honored on it. Get one of the princes, one assumes a very high official, even higher than Haman, or perhaps one of the sons of the king himself, and parade this wonderful, important man, Haman thinks that's got to be me, around the city proclaiming this is what the great, wonderful king does to those who serve him well. And the king is pleased. He's pleased because it is a great honor to have your clothes been worn by someone else. It says that they look up to you because it was a great honor that you wore the king's clothes. I wouldn't really want anyone to be wearing my clothes today, not that I'm a king or anything, but in those days that was seen as being a very special something. And so the king is pleased, and he says to Haman, what a wonderful idea. I'm paraphrasing. Haman doesn't say that actually. What a wonderful idea. Go and do it immediately to Mordecai. And Haman is stunned. We are not told then how stunned he is by this. It only comes out at the end of that chapter. But off he goes and dutifully does the bidding. It must now, of course, be early morning. People are up and about and they see what is happening. And Mordecai is honored in this incredible way. And afterwards, Mordecai goes back to the city gates or the palace gates where he sits and conducts his business or whatever it is he does. And Haman goes home and he is absolutely devastated. And he says to his wife, you can't believe what's happened now. And all of his friends, and the wife says, well, maybe it's because the Jews are the people of God and God is looking after them. What a wonderfully prophetic word. But yet just the evening before, the same wife, Zeresh is her name, had said, why don't you have Mordecai killed? So it doesn't say much about Zeresh, but it paints the picture. It paints the picture of God's faithfulness to his people, of how God is aware of what's happening. And even though sometimes some really horrible things happen to us, God is still in control. He is still there working behind the scenes. And that's what shows this chapter 6 as being so incredibly pivotal, because everything comes to fruition in that one night. And the story ends with Haman crying out, as it were, to his wife, and the eunuchs of the king come to call him to come and have the midday feast with the king. So the whole morning has passed, and Haman has still not gotten permission to kill Mordecai. The gallows are sitting empty, but not empty for long. You'll have to come back tomorrow and the following day to find out what happens. And the eunuchs come. It's again a sign of honor to Haman that the eunuchs come and fetch him for the feast. Folks, it doesn't matter how sad or bad or dark your day is. God is in control. Trust him and let him have his way. He will do so in the most remarkable way that will cause everyone to sit up and pay attention. Folks, God bless. We'll chat again tomorrow. Bye-bye.